For my semester project, I chose to do a small business network, which includes a domain controller, which is hosting the company's Active Directory and domain name services, DNS services, as well as creating a print server, a file server, an application server, and one test machine, just to show that the domain is functioning as we would expect. Here we can see that I did go into Active Directory a little bit. I built several test users. We'll use Phil and Steve here as our brothers in our business, as well as several folder permission and remote access groups, which we can take a look at here quick and just see I kind of tied them off to individual brothers as we will, just to ensure that that our group mappings and such that I have created through group policy are working properly. I decided what I would do is, just for a test case of the group policy, I just went with something simple, such as, in this case, a drive mapping, and also a deployment for the printer, which is running off the print server. I chose to do access groups just as a way of simplifying folder permissions as well as even file permissions should you choose to go that deep, rather than where businesses normally end up finding a headache when they do explicit permissions on folders, which is just a headache to audit as it normally requires a third-party tool. As you can see, I did all of my servers through Hyper-V Manager on what is actually two primary servers, just due to the fact that I was kind of running low on memory. So what I did was I went with 3 servers on one, and then one other server on another server that I had spinning in my home. As you can see here, I have the app server as well as the Windows 10 test box spinning on this one. For this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show the domain functionality of the Windows 10 test box being able to connect to our domain. I'll let this spin up. I'll pause just for a second here. As that's loading, you will notice the apps or the apps box here on the right hand side of the screen. That one I'm not bothering to sign into. I know it's a functioning server. I'm actually going to use it for a remote desktop connection, showing the users Phil and Steve and how their permissions are working amongst one another. So just to test that the domain is functioning correctly, we're going to go ahead and join this machine here to our correct domain. We'll just give it a quick name, the EP test, as it's named on the domain controller. As we can see, the domain is called back looking for credentials in order to be able to go ahead and join it. So we'll go ahead and give it my admin credentials that I created within the Active Directory schema. And you can see that the domain has allowed me to join. And that's about all the use I have for that test box, other than we'll log in. Log in with the users just to kind of show how the drive mapping worked and that it was successful in only showing the drives requested for the 2 users. Now that the machine is back up and running, we can go ahead and just show that it is. You can see below that it is joined to the Eric-Palms domain that we had joined. I am going to go ahead and log in here with Phil just for a first login. I will pause it while it spins up. Once we see that we hit the welcome screen, obviously it'll take about 2 minutes to run group policy, as well as build the user's desktop. Now that our Phil user's up and running here, I'm just going to go ahead and pull up the window or the File Explorer window and just kind of show that the group mappings did push across his personal drive as well as the group drive, which is an open drive to all users on the domain, did appear. And then I'm just going to quickly do another remote connection from within this one, and I'm going to connect it to the EP app server if it's allowed for Phil himself. Now I'm not sure if it will be allowed for Phil. I do have one set up Phil is allowed, Steve is not. It looks like Phil was the one who I had allowed here. What I did here is I just did a simple app server. It just has several free to use apps built out on the server. What we normally see in small business environments is a lot of home-baked programs in which they have very limited licensing, so they'll do a remote desktop style, or if they have limited server space, they may do a remote desktop functionality to access some of their home-baked programs. Just for sake of brevity on the video, I have logged Phil out, and I'm actually getting ready to log in Steve here, just to test and show that the users are different, being that they're assigned to different group policies. We would expect them to act differently. So I'll let him get signed out and pause this video while the screen loads up. While we wait for Steve's to load up on that remote machine here, I'm just going to kind of run through what I've got set up for our file server. As you can see, I just went 3 just smaller sized just test drives. They are all within separate diskings, as you can see, all spun out of one virtual host. You can see here they're all separate drives, so we're going to be allowed to give those all separate permissions. The private is the only one I really put permissions on, with the exception of our users folder. It creates one user folder every time we do a user. Every time we create a new user in Active Directory, it builds out a folder for them. And that's what allows it to map that back to each user. Our private drive I am controlling through our group policy, which we'll see on Steve here in just a second. Alright, now that Steve's all loaded up, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to pop up his drives. And you can see that he caught the P drive through group mapping, as he was granted the access to private root Active Directory group, which allowed the group policy to catch it and map it off to him. For Steve's use case, we're just going to test the print server here. And just for sake of keeping the video a little shorter, I did go ahead and just get into the printers and scanners here. We can see that the HP device is showing up on the print server, as well as connecting and installing the drivers. And then while it's doing that, I'm just going to do the same remote connection that we had done before with Phil, just over to the EP app server, just to kind of show that the permissioning is working as it would be expected. We can see that Steve was denied because he was not granted the allow remote apps connection that I had given Phil. Now we're just going to jump onto the print server, just kind of show the printer that we were just installing with Steve, to kind of give the brief rundown of how it's laid out. Obviously we have the standard Microsoft default printers, as well as our one HP, which is just tied off to a local printer in my home. Now if we print a test page, I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear it or not, but the printer does fire up, print out its test page as you would expect. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.